In a bustling African city, Chuka, famously called Chukky Wire Wire, was the definition of wealth and pride. He lived large, spraying money in clubs, weddings, and markets, mocking everyone with his riches. Yet, behind his designer clothes, flashy cars, and expensive mansion, lay a dark and deadly secret. His fortune was built on blood money. When his hidden crimes of kidnapping and body part dealings were exposed, his name turned from admiration to disgrace, teaching the world that ill-gotten wealth never lasts. Sit back, relax, and find out what happened in this wonderful story. In the busy streets of Enugu, one name was louder than the blaring horns and louder than the town criers of old: Chukky Wire Wire. Nobody called him Chuka anymore, not even his old school friends. His nickname swallowed his real name until it disappeared like smoke in the air. Whenever someone shouted, "Chukky Wire Wire," he would throw his broad chest forward, smile with white shining teeth, and reply with his famous line, "Money na water." The crowd would cheer, women would giggle, and men would nod in forced respect. Chuka had everything people desired: tall, dark, muscular, always wearing the latest designer clothes from Italy, France, and Dubai. His shoes shone brighter than the sun, his perfumes lingered in the air long after he had left, and his cars, Bentleys, Range Rovers, and Lamborghinis, roared through the town like lions. He was the perfect picture of success. But behind the admiration was jealousy and suspicion. Some whispered that no man his age could make such money legally. Others argued he was just a blessed businessman. Yet no one truly knew. Chuka himself never cared to explain. He loved the mystery. In fact, he enjoyed watching people argue about him. To him, the confusion was part of his power. The young and poor boys around town idolized him. They wanted to dress like him, talk like him, walk like him. To them, he was a god of money. But the elders shook their heads. They had lived long enough to know that money that appears from nowhere often has dark roots. Still, nobody dared to confront him. His money covered his sins, or so everyone thought. Everywhere Chukky Wire Wire went, money followed. Not because he gave it freely to solve people's problems, but because he used it to display his arrogance. In weddings, he would spray bundles of naira notes on the bride's head, laughing as people scrambled on the floor to pick. In clubs, he would order 30 bottles of the most expensive champagne, pour them on the floor, and shout, "Drink money, bath money, money na water." His friends would clap and women would scream his name. But in private, when people came to him begging for help, a widow needing school fees, a sick man needing hospital bills, a struggling youth needing a chance, he would laugh in their faces. Do you think money grows on the tree? Go and hustle. Money is not for lazy people. Then he would push them away. Ironically, the same night, he would step out in his flashy convoy of cars and throw bundles of money into the air just to see hungry people fight for it. To him, that was entertainment. He liked seeing people crawl on the ground for his leftover notes. That made him feel like a king and them, beggars. The community talked behind him, but no one could resist his wealth. Politicians invited him to their homes. Pastors gave him front row seats in church. Musicians called his name in their songs. Money bought him respect, even when his arrogance bruised everyone around him. But deep inside, a few wise ones wondered, what exactly does Chukky Wire Wire do? No company, no business, no office, yet the money never finishes. That silent question would one day explode like a time bomb. Chuka's mansion was the biggest in town. With marble floors, golden staircases, swimming pools, and imported chandeliers. It looked like something out of a foreign movie. Every weekend, his gates opened wide for parties, girls, music, alcohol, and endless displays of wealth. To outsiders, it was paradise. But to insiders, it was prison. His staff worked under fear. They never asked questions. They cleaned bloodstains they didn't understand. They moved heavy bags into basements without peeping inside. They saw guests arrive at midnight but never saw them leave in the morning. They heard muffled cries in the night but pretended it was the television. Nobody dared to speak, because Chuka's money silenced both mouths and consciences. One of his drivers, Okafor, once told a close friend, "That man is not ordinary. I have driven him to strange places in the dead of the night. I cannot explain what I saw." His friend laughed it off, saying it was envy talking. But deep down, Okafor knew something was wrong. The wealth that dazzled the community came with shadows, dark, dangerous, and hungry shadows. And though Chuka thought he was untouchable, fate was already sharpening its knife, waiting for the right time to strike. Market days were the worst days for the poor whenever Chukky Wire Wire appeared. He loved entering the marketplace with his convoy of cars, sirens blaring like he was a governor. People would abandon their goods and rush to see him. Children screamed his name, women danced, and men stood in awe. He would step down in one of his expensive Italian suits, gold chains hanging on his thick neck, and a diamond wristwatch that blinded eyes in the sun. Then, with a wicked smile, he would fling bundles of naira into the air. The money rained like leaves falling from a tree. The market women, some of them old enough to be his mother, would scramble on the dusty floor, fighting and tearing one another's clothes just to grab a note. Chuka would laugh and clap his hands like a child watching a circus. "Money na water," he shouted, as his guards pushed people around to make way for him. But behind the laughter were broken hearts. A widow selling tomatoes stared at him with tears in her eyes. She had begged him the week before for help to send her son to school, but he had driven her away with insults. Now she watched him throw away millions just to mock hungry people. "God is watching," she whispered under her breath. Yet, nobody could confront him openly. He was too powerful, too rich, too feared. In every corner of the city, people whispered about him. At beer parlors, men argued late into the night. "I tell you, that man is a fraudster. Nobody gets money like that without business. No, he is a big-time businessman. He imports goods from abroad. You lie. If he was doing business, we would know his office. Where is his shop? Where are his workers? Forget that. The man is just blessed. Not everybody's story is the same. Maybe his ancestors gave him riches." The debate never ended. Some said he was into internet fraud, but his money was too much for that. Others said he was a secret oil dealer. Yet, the truth remained hidden. Chuka himself fueled the mystery. He loved showing up at events with coded statements like, "Money doesn't come from sweat, it comes from sense." People clapped, not understanding. He never explained, and they never dared to ask. But the suspicious eyes of the elders grew sharper. They had seen wealth before, they had seen corruption before, but there was something darker about this one. They sensed it, but could not prove it. It was only a matter of time before the truth dug itself out of the grave he had buried it in. One humid night, the music in Chuka's mansion stopped suddenly. The girls who danced by his poolside screamed and ran when they heard noises from the basement. It was not the usual sound of music or laughter, it was the sound of someone crying, someone begging for mercy. The guards quickly locked the doors, pretending nothing had happened. But rumors had already started spreading. A cook swore she saw a young man chained in the basement. A gardener whispered that Chuka had visitors who never returned home. Then, one day, his driver Okafor came home trembling. His wife asked him what was wrong, but he kept silent. Only later, in the dead of night, he whispered to her, "I cannot continue like this. That man is evil. I saw him with my own eyes delivering human parts in a black bag. I drove him there myself." His wife covered her mouth in shock. "Okafor, don't ever say this outside. He will kill us. But secrets are like smoke, they can never be contained forever." That night marked the first crack in Chuka's kingdom of wealth. A kingdom built on blood can never stand forever. The clock was ticking, and his downfall was closer than he imagined. The moon was full, and the city was asleep. But inside Chuka's mansion, the night was far from peaceful. Deep in the basement, muffled cries echoed. A boy, no more than 20, was chained to a rusty iron pole, tears soaking his dirty shirt. His voice was hoarse from screaming for days, but nobody came to rescue him. Upstairs, the music was loud, the drinks endless, and the laughter intoxicating. Chuka sat in his throne-like chair, surrounded by girls, smoking expensive cigars, and sipping golden champagne. To him, life was good. But to the chained boy beneath his feet, life was fading. That night, Chuka received visitors. They didn't arrive in flashy cars, no sirens, no noise. They came quietly, slipping into the mansion like shadows. They were politicians, powerful men in suits, their faces hidden in the dark. They didn't come for fun. They came for business, the kind of business that never sees the light of day. Hours later, Chuka's guards carried out black nylon bags into a tinted SUV. The neighbors peeped from afar, but nobody dared to question. Everyone feared him. Everyone feared the unknown. But unknown to Chuka, one of his staff, the gardener, had filmed a short video from his small phone, hiding behind a wall. His hands shook as he pressed record. His conscience battled his fear. That shaky video would one day become the key to everything. Days later, something unusual happened. In the darkness of the basement, while the guards were drunk from a night of reckless partying, the chained boy noticed one of the padlocks had not been tightly locked. With trembling hands, he pulled and pulled until the chain loosened. For the first time in weeks, he was free. Barefoot and weak, he tiptoed past the guards who snored loudly on the floor. His heart pounded like a drum as he crawled through the backyard, squeezing through the small hole he had noticed days ago. The night was cold, but freedom burned in his chest. He ran through bushes, stumbled over stones, and tore his flesh on barbed wires. But he didn't stop. Every step was powered by the thought of survival. He ran until he reached a small village at dawn. The villagers gathered around him when they saw his bruises and chains still hanging on his wrists. "Who did this to you?" an old man asked. The boy, shivering and exhausted, whispered the name, Chukky Wire Wire, before collapsing on the ground. The village shook with shock. The name that symbolized wealth and power had now been tied to blood and chains. And for the first time, people had proof, living proof, that the rumors were not just rumors. By the next day, the news had spread like wildfire. The boy's story traveled faster than cars, faster than radio, faster than lies. The name, Chukky Wire Wire, no longer carried admiration but suspicion and fear. People whispered in markets, in churches, on buses. "So it's true? That's how he makes his money. I always suspected. Money without business is never clean. Ah, God. How many innocent souls has he destroyed?" Politicians who once invited him for parties started distancing themselves. Pastors who gave him front row seats suddenly stopped mentioning his name. Musicians who praised him in songs erased his name from their playlists. The same society that once worshipped him now spat at the mention of his name. Meanwhile, the authorities were not blind. The video from the gardener and the testimony of the escaped boy landed on the desk of the state commissioner of police. A secret investigation began immediately. They tapped Chuka's phones, followed his movements, and traced his secret meetings. But Chuka, in his arrogance, didn't notice. He was too busy shouting, "Money na water," at clubs, too busy throwing money at the poor, too busy mocking those who once adored him. He didn't know that the empire he built on blood was already crumbling, and the ground beneath his feet was cracking open. For the first time in years, Chuka could not sleep. His usually bold and arrogant heart was restless. He had noticed strange things: unmarked cars parked near his mansion, men pretending to buy roasted corn but watching his gate too closely, unknown numbers calling his phone and cutting off once he picked. At first, he dismissed it. Maybe it's jealousy, he told himself. But when his closest guard whispered to him that police officers had been asking questions in the neighborhood, his smile vanished. That night, he sat alone in his golden chair. No girls, no friends, no music. The silence of the mansion pressed on him like a heavy stone. He remembered the boy who had escaped. He clenched his fists in anger. "How could my men be so careless?" he roared. Chuka had lived with no fear for so long that fear now tasted bitter in his mouth. For the first time, he imagined the possibility of losing everything: his cars, his mansion, his respect. The thought terrified him. He paced the floor till morning, his mind racing for a way out. The investigation grew deeper. The police moved carefully, like hunters stalking a lion. They knew Chukky Wire Wire was powerful and dangerous, but they also knew they finally had enough pieces of evidence to drag him down. Officers collected testimonies from families of the missing. Mothers cried as they mentioned the last time they saw their sons, daughters, and husbands, most of them last seen entering Chuka's mansion or his cars. The escaped boy, though weak, described the basement, the chains, the screams, the politicians. His words were like daggers piercing through Chuka's glittering image. Meanwhile, the gardener's video was leaked secretly to a journalist. Though the journalist was too scared to release it publicly, he handed it over to the police for protection. The video was blurry but clear enough: black bags being loaded at midnight, Chuka's face visible in the background, giving orders. The trap was almost ready. The police just needed to know when he would try to escape. Chuka's arrogance returned, but it was mixed with panic. He knew the walls were closing in. He began liquidating his wealth. Cars were secretly sold, gold transferred abroad, and fake passports prepared. He told his closest allies he was planning a holiday, but in truth, it was an escape plan. His biggest mistake was trusting too many people. One of his bodyguards, scared of being arrested, secretly became an informant. Every detail of Chuka's plan, his flight date, the private jet, the secret airstrip, was reported to the authorities. On the outside, Chuka was still playing his role. He still went to clubs, still sprayed money, still shouted, "Money na water." But inside, he was restless. He knew he had to run before it was too late. What he didn't know was that the same people who once bowed at his feet were now waiting eagerly for the day he would fall. Society was sharpening its knives, and the law had spread its net wide. Chuka decided to throw one final party before disappearing. He wanted the whole town to talk about it forever, a reminder of his so-called greatness. Invitations spread across the city: musicians, dancers, politicians, businessmen, and women of all kinds filled his mansion. That night, the mansion glittered like a palace. Fireworks lit the sky, champagne flowed like rivers, and girls danced wildly by the pool. Chuka, dressed in a golden agbada with diamond-studded shoes, sat like a king on his throne. Every now and then, he shouted, "Money na water," and the crowd echoed in madness. But behind the music and fake laughter, something was different. The smiles were thinner, the whispers louder. Some guests who once admired him avoided eye contact. A few bold ones even mocked him quietly. "Enjoy now, your end is near. Blood money doesn't last." Chuka laughed, but his chest tightened. He raised his glass high, trying to silence his fear. Deep inside, he knew this would be his last show. The police had been watching. For weeks, they had traced his calls, followed his movements, and gathered enough evidence to bury him in prison for life. The commissioner of police gave the final order: do not arrest him at his mansion. He is too guarded. Catch him when he tries to escape. True to plan, Chuka's jet was scheduled to take off from a private airstrip just outside the city. The officers surrounded the area silently, waiting in the shadows. They carried no sirens, no noise, only determination. Meanwhile, one of his guards, the same one secretly working with the police, updated them. He will arrive tomorrow night, around 11:30 p.m. He thinks nobody knows. The trap was ready. The night of his escape came. Chuka entered his black Range Rover, accompanied by a few loyal guards. He wore a dark hoodie, unlike his usual flamboyant outfits. For the first time in years, he didn't want attention. He wanted silence. As the convoy approached the private airstrip, Chuka smiled to himself. "Fools. They can't touch me. By tomorrow, I'll be in Dubai, and from there, Europe. Let them talk. Money na water." But just as he stepped out of the car and approached the waiting jet, blinding floodlights switched on. Armed policemen surrounded the airstrip from every angle. "Chuka Okoro, you are under arrest." The words hit him like a hammer. His guards dropped their guns immediately, raising their hands in surrender. Chuka froze, his legs suddenly weak. For the first time, the arrogant billionaire was speechless. Handcuffs clicked on his wrists, the same way chains once held his victims. The man who mocked the poor, who laughed at widows, who shouted, "Money na water," now had his face pressed into the dust. The fall of Chukky Wire Wire was complete, but his disgrace was only beginning. Morning broke, and the news spread like wildfire. Chukky Wire Wire arrested. By noon, the streets were filled with people running to the police station just to confirm. The man who once commanded respect was now paraded before cameras, handcuffed like a common criminal. Crowds gathered, shouting, spitting, and cursing. Women threw sand in anger. Men shook their fists. Mothers of the missing wept uncontrollably, screaming his name with bitterness. "Chuka, where is my son? Chukky Wire Wire, return my daughter." He tried to cover his face, but the cameras caught him. Reporters pushed microphones at him, asking questions he could not answer. His golden chains were gone, his designer clothes replaced with a torn t-shirt and dusty trousers. He looked smaller, weaker, like a lion dragged in chains. For the first time, his famous reply, "Money na water," did not come out of his lips. His mouth was dry, his head bowed. His kingdom had turned to dust before his eyes. The courtroom was packed. People who had once admired him now filled the seats to watch him fall. Police stood guard at every corner. Journalists scribbled furiously, waiting for quotes. The judge entered, and silence filled the room. Chuka stood in the dock, his eyes hollow. The charges were read: kidnapping, murder, human trafficking, and ritual killings. Each word struck like thunder. Then came the witnesses. The escaped boy, now healthier, took the stand. His voice trembled as he described the basement, the chains, the nights of fear. The crowd gasped. Some covered their mouths in horror. Then came mothers of the victims. Their cries pierced the air like knives. One old woman, shaking, lifted a photo of her daughter and shouted through her tears, "This man destroyed my life. Judge, I want justice." The gardener's video was played on a large screen. Gasps filled the hall as people saw Chuka giving orders while black bags were loaded into cars. There was no more doubt, no more mystery. His wealth had been built on blood. For once, Chuka could not laugh, could not boast. His head dropped lower with each testimony. His arrogance was buried under the weight of his sins. Chuka had expected loyalty from his inner circle, but when the trial dragged on, his allies abandoned him one by one. The politicians who once visited his mansion denied ever knowing him. His friends who drank his wine and slept with his girls vanished. Even his guards turned witnesses to save themselves. One of his closest bodyguards testified, "He paid us to silence the cries. He paid us to carry the bodies. I was afraid of him, but now I am free." The courtroom shook with murmurs. Chuka's jaw tightened. Betrayal cut deeper than the judge's words. He realized he had built his empire on fear, not loyalty. And fear always collapses when the power is gone. When the judge adjourned for sentencing, the crowd erupted. Some shouted prayers of thanksgiving. Others mocked him. "Money na water, Abby? Where is the money now?" For the first time, Chuka's eyes filled with tears. But they were not tears of repentance, only tears of shame. He finally tasted what he had served others all his life: humiliation. The day of sentencing came. The courtroom was heavier than ever, filled with villagers, journalists, and families of victims. Outside, crowds stretched along the streets, waiting to hear the final judgment. Everyone wanted to witness the end of the man who once mocked them with money. Chuka entered the dock, dressed in a faded prison uniform, his hands cuffed, his once polished skin now pale. Gone was the swagger, gone was the smile, gone was the golden shine. The judge's gavel struck, and silence swallowed the room. The charges were read again: multiple counts of kidnapping, ritual killings, trafficking, and conspiracy with powerful figures. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimonies were undeniable. The judge's voice thundered through the hall. "Chuka Okoro, popularly known as Chukky Wire Wire, you have lived a life of pride, arrogance, and blood. You mocked the poor, you destroyed families, and you turned human lives into currency. Today, justice must speak for the dead, for the broken, and for the living." The hall shook as the words fell. "You are hereby sentenced to death by hanging." Cries filled the courtroom. Some wept in relief, others shouted with joy. Mothers of victims hugged one another. The once untouchable Chukky Wire Wire collapsed on his knees, his face buried in his hands. His empire had fallen, and there was no escape left. Days later, the newspapers screamed, "Chukky Wire Wire executed." His name, once a symbol of wealth and power, was now a warning carved into history. At the marketplace, people spoke with mixed emotions. Some pitied him, others spat on the ground at the mention of his name. The same crowd that once scrambled for his sprayed money now pointed at him as an example of shame. His mansion was seized by the government. The cars were auctioned, the gold confiscated. Everything he once bragged about was stripped away. His so-called friends vanished like smoke. His nickname, once shouted in admiration, was now whispered in disgust. But the greatest wound was not to his name alone. It was to the memory of the lives he destroyed. Families still carried their pain, widows still mourned, children still cried at night. No wealth could repair what Chuka had taken. And so, his story ended not in glory, but in disgrace. A reminder that money without mercy is poison. That wealth built on blood is a curse, not a blessing. And that pride always walks hand in hand with destruction. For those who once idolized him, the lesson was clear. Money na water, yes, but life is blood. And when you trade blood for money, the water will drown you. True wealth is not measured by money gained through blood or deceit, but by the lives we touch with kindness and honesty. No matter how long lies and evil hide, the truth will always rise, and every man must reap what he sows. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Guess what? I am cooking something really great that you wouldn't want to miss. So subscribe now and join our family. Give this video a thumbs up and share to your family and friends. See you soon.